Bitcoin getting crushed again. It is now off 16% since hitting all-time highs earlier this month.
But the bank also pointed to tens of billions of pounds in extra savings by households who have not been able to spend, but at some point could be unleashed. Another much-needed shot in the arm.
Assalamu alaikum and welcome to Focus on Finance. In today's program, we talk about investments. What are investments and what are the range of options people and companies have when it comes to investing? Joining me in the studio today, we have Niazi Hoolash, an accountant by profession, Shamin Sookia, a managing director of a corporate finance advisory firm based here in Mauritius. Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum salam.
Earlier, we asked members of the public what investment and investing meant to them and whether they had made any investments themselves. Let's hear what they had to say.
Pour moi, l'investissement, c'est comme si et pour créer l'emploi et aussi pour dire aider les gens qui dans les besoins, les gens qui étaient plus démunis.
Moi, quand je un investissement, je la banque. Premièrement, si vous avez envie d'investir dans un business, commencer une entreprise, etc., disons la banque, vous demandez un prêt bancaire, pour cave, commence à petit.
Personnellement, je pense que l'investissement, c'est quand, par exemple, si vous avez un but dans la vie, ok, et par exemple, si vous pouvez investir dans une affaire assez, pas personnelle, mais disons, si vous avez un but dans la vie, vous besoin d'investir. Chaque projet que vous pouvez faire, vous besoin une réalisation avec cela. Donc, je pense que si on vient investir, il commence par ça.
Les congés, quand on casse dans une compagnie, et la compagnie, il faut dire comment évoluer, c'est comment s'inclure ça là. Là, on fait un profit d'après ce que vous mettez dans la compagnie là. Et à la fin là, aussi il y a un info là, qu'il faut dire on investit et la compagnie là commence comment décrire ça là. Et là, on commence à un loss. Alors, il y a une affaire un peu tricky, vous avez connu donc vous pouvez investir ça là.
Moi, comme dans l'investissement, c'est qui casse fait rentrer. Alors, on peut rentrer, donc en retour, on peut gagner quelque chose moi ici. Comme on peut investir dans des affaires, on besoin d'un bon retour. Voilà, en gros, si vous parlez rentrer dans le détail, investissement qui était pour moi.
Alors, investissement, c'est que nous pouvons investir côté de l'infrastructure, côté de la route, côté même bâtiment et aussi, c'est plus côté gouvernement ou privé aussi, mais grandissement de travail aussi, il y a plus d'investissement aussi dans le pays.
Mais j'ai investi dans pas mal de trucs. Par exemple, dans mes études, si de nos jours, la plupart de mes étudiants, je peux gagner facilité avec le gouvernement côté investissement, mais auparavant, ce n'était pas trop le cas. Auparavant, tu faisais un travail et ensuite pour pouvoir investir dans une étude.
Oui, à plusieurs reprises, dans 16 et dans l'élevage et puis dans la construction.
Acheter investir les carvings de plusieurs formes. Si je dis comme ça, je vais élèves associés. Si je peux dire, je peux suivre ça cours là, c'est un investissement pour le futur.
Alors, j'ai déjà participé dans le Stock Exchange Mauritius, alors je sais bien la bourse de Maurice. Bon, en ce moment, le niveau est un peu, pour l'investissement, est un peu bas. Et c'est très bien comme si d'investir dans le bourse de Maurice.
La bourse, c'est qu'il y a une action, différentes compagnies, qui ont action, qui montent, baisser. Il dépend compagnie là, comment elles vont progresser. Donc, là, nous venons, nous investissons l'argent. Là, c'est comment dire, plus sur la côte montée, nous gagnons casse. Et comment les descendre, nous perdons du casse. Donc, à nous de savoir si quand nous faisons tirer, quand nous faisons mettre, quand nous faisons acheter, quand nous vendons. Voilà, en gros, c'est un exchange.
So, an interesting range of comments from the audience there. Niazi, what is an investment according to you?
Thank you, Shafique. Good question. I think in simple terms, an investment, when we talk about investments, we can invest in our time, to upskill, to train, to do exercise in our health. But for purposes of today's program, we're going to focus on investment in wealth, or investment for wealth. So anything that, there are two ways we can basically spend money. We earn money and we can spend it by either buying things for immediate consumption, which we will not normally consider as investment, that's spending money for consumption. But there's another way where you can actually invest the funds, which is basically putting the money to a use where you can eventually expect a return from it. Now, the most simple type of investments, which is very common, is the example of us putting savings in a bank account. Mm-hmm. That is a form of investment. Another common type of investment is investing in shares, investing in a life insurance plan, investing in land and buildings and real estate. So there are various ways, investing in a business. So there's various ways in which you can put your money to work to earn a return. Generally, we can consider that action as an investment.
Thank you, Niazi. Shamin, from your perspective, you advise companies. Do they do investments, and what range of investments do they have open to them?
Thank you very much, Shafique. If I were to speak about investments, so I think it's more about the psyche of human beings. You know, there is a time period which runs ahead of man's life, mm-hmm. and he wants to progress, he wants to grow. And as per, if you just look back in the history of mankind, so you will see at each and every step along this sort of thread. So he was like gathering, you know, tools, etc., to use up and then to be better, to earn his living. But as things became more and more sophisticated, so we saw throughout history that, so there's the concept of money, for instance. I think Niazi spoke about that. So it's like putting funds aside in order to earn some sort of return to prepare for the future. But of course, where the question that you asked me with regards to corporates, so as you know, corporates have a motto, you know, an objective of making profits. Mm-hmm. So in order to make profits, sometimes they have to set aside some funds in order to invest. So invest, that's where the word comes from. So an investment in, for example, it's people. It has to recruit. An example of another sort of investment, it can be passive investment, for instance. Mm-hmm. But investments also tends to be associated with short-term, long-term, medium-term, with a time running ahead of where you stand now, and you want to make your wealth be bigger than it was, like let's say you call it time zero from now on, and then as you move, you want to increase your wealth, you want to enhance your belongings, etc. So all these could be termed as investments, but for corporates would set aside funds, of course, from the profits they make, for instance, and they would invest or reinvest in the company to make more funds to grow and to develop.
So if I summarize the investments when we're talking about wealth or money, it's basically the money that you're not spending immediately, but you're spending it in something that will grow and make more money or create more wealth going forward. So I think that's a concept that we can all agree with. Perhaps it would be useful if we could list some of the investments. Now, from an Islamic perspective, we heard in the previous program, interest is not allowed. So investing your money in a bank account, which is common these days in the Western society, and earning interest is an investment, but it's not halal. But I think from an Islamic perspective, all the other real investments, where there is an element of risk and profit return, sharing of profit, that is halal.
Absolutely. And I would tend to think, see, coming to the Islamic viewpoint as well, yes, interest is prohibited, that is clear. However, even if we find a large number of investments today having interest as the form of return, there are even a much larger number of types of investments which are absolutely halal. For instance, if you're investing in shares in a company, right? Basically, the company is engaged in activity, let's say trading activity, that is absolutely halal. If you're investing in a pension plan, right, and that pension plan is then investing in other instruments to grow, and you're actually putting money aside for your future, for your retirement, that's absolutely halal investment. Real estate, if you're buying to sell or buying for the value to appreciate, it is certainly halal. And of course, as you know in Islam, if you've got property or wealth which is unused, which is passive, there is the concept of zakat, which actually has to be paid on capital or investments that is unused. So definitely these are different ways. You can buy jewelry, commodities, trade in a business. These are absolutely, these are investments, and they are those types of investments which are good for the economy, halal, and good for the economy, good for the society at large.
Thank you. Niazi mentioned investing in shares. I think for us who work in the finance, we understand what a share is. Shamin, your background used to be working in the stock exchange of Mauritius, head of listing. Perhaps you could explain to the viewers what is a share. And we'll have a program that will look at this into more detail. But in the context of investments, what is a share?
Yeah, in very simple terms, perhaps I would take the example of a sole trader. A sole trader who sets up a business, let's say a shop, in which the sole trader invests, let's say, I would say like 100,000 pounds sterling, right, at the start. So this is his stake, his equity stake. But if that person wants to bring in a partner, so maybe he would say like 50-50. So I bring in 50,000 pounds sterling, and you bring in 50,000 pounds sterling. So there would be two equity partners in the business. And with that equity capital, so they can grow the business, they can invest, of course, they would put that money into investments, right? Maybe trade, and then so as to increase their wealth and make profit, and then reinvest again. But if you take this formula to the extreme, in the sense that you want to bring in, let's say, 100,000 investors, where each would put like £1 sterling. So you would have 100,000 investors in that particular company or a shop or anything, a business enterprise. So if you just call this the worth of one particular investment as one share.
So in your example, we have 100,000 people with an investment of £1 sterling. I think the word share itself, it explains what it is. My understanding, it's actually a share is buying ownership of a company. And it's your share of that company. So if you have 100,000 shares and you own 100,000th of that company. And I think from an investment perspective, when we do long-term forecasting, the share is basically defined as the right for a share of the profit that the company makes. Now, in some views, and technical views, the valuation of a share should be just what the future profits are. But we'll come to that in what a stock market does. But I think as a general view, share or equity, which is what the jargon, I think, finance people use for shares, are just when you invest in a company and you own a portion of the company, and then you earn normally what the profits are. And technically that comes as dividends. I think it gets a bit complicated when you have a stock exchange and you're buying it.
Maybe I would like to add something, yes. Shafique, to what you said. So it's a proportion in the stake. So it's a stake in the company.
Yes.
Let's say we've taken the example of 100,000 shares, so 100,000 pounds sterling. If you have 100,000 investors, so each investor would get one share, so £1 sterling. But of course, you've talked about profits, so sharing the profits of the company in proportion to the stake that one particular investor has in the company. Let's say one investor has 10 shares, so another investor has 100 shares. So the investor with 100 shares will have 10 times participation in the profits of the company. But I'm just thinking one thing about what Niazi said about Islamic finance. So apart from the fact that investors tend to participate in the profits of the company, So there's also risks and rewards. So whenever there is a winding up, let's say, of the company, in company law, in corporate law, so the shareholders will also participate in the losses of the company when the company is wound up, etc. So we can talk about that later. It's a bit sophisticated for the time being.
Yeah. But I think in simple terms, the way I was taught, the owner of a company is the shareholders collectively. So if there's one shareholder with all the shares, he owns a company. If there are 100,000, they collectively own, but one may have 900,000, and the others would have a small proportion. But they are the owners. But then once you get into advanced economics and finance, then you have the managers of a company and the shareholders. But this is outside the scope of the discussion.
Maybe one thing, Shafique, which I would like to add to what you just said. So this one particular share, in all respects, is equal to every share in that particular capital of the company or business enterprise. So it will afford the holder of that particular share the right, for instance, to receive dividends, to receive profits, to share in the losses, but also the right in many instances to vote. Because as you know, so shareholders, if you take the example of corporates or companies, so they have the ability, they have the right to vote at general meetings, etc., to decide on the way that the company has to be managed.
Yes. Yeah. So that's share ownership. There are other types of investments. Perhaps we can list a few others. So we've talked about jewelry, property. What about land? Is that an investment?
Yes, it can be considered an investment, and in a number of ways. If you're a real estate company or an individual, and you decide that you want to buy and sell land for profit, that's a clear investment. Mm-hmm. And in fact, it's not land as an end in itself, it is the buying and selling, the trading of land. We see people buying land and they are parceling it and selling it, and they're putting some infrastructure in there. So their investment is the purchase of the land, the investment in developing the infrastructure to bring the roads, the water, the electricity, the sewage, and they are able to sell it in small parcels, and by definition, you're able to sell it at a significantly higher price, the sum total, than what you had put in. So that is an investment. And of course, you can be holding land for speculative reasons. Mm-hmm. Now, it is everyone's best guess of how good it is or not, but it is an investment, and to the extent that you're paying your zakat on it, if it is just passive land sitting there, it's absolutely fine.
Mm. And even in high finance, there are what are called alternative investments as well. Can you give us some examples of that? Perhaps art, antiques, anything else?
Sure, art, antiques, and like investing in minerals, in mines. So people invest. I remember at one point in time, there was somebody who was investing in a minery, or a refinery which was to be built in the sea near Brazil. I just read it on an article, and finally so much money had been poured into that project, and when it came to reality, they found that there was no oil. So much money has been dipped, investment that have been thrown through the drains, going down the drains. So investment also, there's a question that we could be asking ourselves. So for instance, why don't we invest in air? So that's a very peculiar question about economics of things. So there's the law of demand, supply, and of course boils down to scarcity. So air is freely available for the time being, because water itself was freely available, but I think in Mauritius itself we pay water at a very low cost. So it's very less costly than in other countries where, for instance. So it's about the economics of things also. So why don't we invest in air? But we invest in things to which there's a value attached.
Yeah. I think probably to add to what Shamin is saying. Now, when you get into this type of investments, which become more sophisticated, what I find there are a number of elements. Let's say if someone is investing in what we call futures. So let's say they're investing in, there's a company, for a simple example, which is has intentions to go into renewable energy from a new source. Now we know today renewable energy is something very successful. and there's a lot of speculation around it, people would attach a value far more to what the investment has been put into the enterprise, because there's an expectation that the growth will justify the higher value now. Now, this is also very risky. Mm-hmm. Now, talking about investment in air, for instance, or energy futures, etc., is for me pure speculation. And also, speaking about air, investments in air or in freely available resources, this reminds me of the early 2000s, where there was this scandal of Enron, etc., where that company was investing into all sorts of into climate futures. So they were betting on the climate would change in a certain way. So they were having enterprises that were built on certain expectations in the future, and that was a sign of value, and people were actually buying shares into those companies, investing into things that were, pun intended, hot air. Mm-hmm. So I think when we talk about investments, my take on it is that people can invest, they should understand what they're getting into, and more importantly, it is not because they see the crowd following a certain thing. Like, for example, there's such a craze today about investing in cryptocurrency. Well, guess what? You might call it investing, some might call it speculating, or almost gambling. And people have to be careful about it. So yes, investment is important. It's a good way to make your money work. There are risks attached to it, but so far you are investing in activities or in companies or enterprises which you understand what the core of activity is, where you understand what is generating the value, then I would term these as safer investments for those people who are deciding to invest.
So, thank you, gentlemen. We're coming to the end of our time. So, let's just try and summarize what we've covered today. So, investments in the wealth context are things that you put your money in with the expectation that you will get an increase in wealth going forward. We have a range of investments. Some are Islamically halal, anything not involved with interest, but in real things, which is providing value. It's actually what the finance world is investing in these days. I made the comment in the program on interest that people with money rarely put their money in just to earn interest. They rather will go and look for what we call tangible investments that will earn money over time and will increase their wealth. And there's an element of risk and an element of profit sharing. So it has to be productively used and then earning, and it helps not just the one who's invested, but the one who's working, etc. We've seen a range of investments from bank products. We've touched on shares, and we'll have another program on shares in the stock exchange. There's property, there's land, there's commodities, which means basically real things like gold, coal, oil, and so on. So a range of things, but also, in a way, investing in your time and your health and training is also there, so you can increase your wealth both materially and in some ways spiritually going forward. So I think there's a lot of food for thought there, but from an Islamic perspective, stay away from interest. Not only is that a religious commandment, but it's also makes economic sense. Thank you very much, Niazi Saib, Shamin Saib. Thank you very much, dear viewer, for joining us, and we hope to see you again in the next program on Focus on Finance. Assalamu alaikum.